Hi there, it's Sarah of Get Weaving, and it's the big one today. It's called Cutting Without Fear. It's the thing I get asked more questions about than anything else. How can I cut my fabric, my hand woven fabric, without it falling to bits? So that's what this is all going to be about. I do have a booklet, Cutting Without Fear. It's in my Etsy shop. It's also available as a download, which obviously you can print at home, which might suit people a bit better. I've made my mock-up, got that here. I know it fits, which is good. I've got my fabric, that's all laid out here. It's been washed and dried and measured. I'm making this pattern, T001, with short sleeves. The original one was in cotton, a sleeveless one, but this is wool, so I'm making it a little bit shorter, otherwise I think it's going to be too hot. I've got my project sheet, all filled in, up to date. I'm really pleased because I had very little of the hand spun yarn left, which is great. So what we're going to do is cut this top out and show you our magic formula, if you like, how to stop your fabric from fraying so that you can sew it, wear it, wash it as you would any other garment. So here we go. So I've got my pattern laid out. I've laid the whole thing out on the fabric. I can't show you that at the moment, but I have plenty, and I think I've actually got enough for some pockets. So what I need is my pattern that's been adjusted from the mock-up. I've also got the pattern booklet, and on page 3 it's got the layout. I've actually changed it slightly so that the pieces fit even closer together because I don't like any waste. You need a pair of scissors, sharp scissors that really you only use for dressmaking. You need pins. I like these ones with the like pearl heads on them, but also I like using weights. I find that the fabric stays much flatter using weights, so that's what I generally do. And I don't know if you can see, but I'm so pleased the pattern and the fabric are almost exactly the same size. So here we go. I've also got next to me an iron ready and a press cloth, especially if your fabric has anything synthetic in it. I'm going to show you some of the different ways that we suggest sealing the edges, and then I'm going to show you the method that we like most. So let's go for that. One of the ways that you can stop your fabric from unravelling when you cut it out is shown on page 6 here. I'll put a close-up of this in a minute as well. So what you do is you draw or baste around your pattern pieces. So I've done this before now with a big black felt pen. And then you machine stitch just inside the cutting line, and then you cut your pieces out. So that's one possible way of doing things. That's exactly what I did with this fabric. This was woven with a variable reed. So you can see it's quite a lot of difference and quite a lot of rag weaving in it. So you really wouldn't want to lose a whole row. It would be too much. So with this top, definitely, I had the pattern laid out. I drew around the shapes and then very carefully machine stitched before cutting them out, and that way I didn't lose lots of rows. That worked well for that. What I would say though, I'd avoid using pinking shears. These are fantastic for fine cottons and what have you, but it's amazing what a difference just that cut can be. When you do your final seams, you could lose 1/4 of an inch. If you lose that on every single piece, and if you think you've got perhaps two fronts, two backs, they've got 2 seams each, you could lose or gain up to a whole inch. So I wouldn't use pinking shears for your hand wovens if I were you. Now another thing that you could try is this. That's seam tape, and that's nice and firm. So that is stitched along the seam line. That stops your fabric from stretching. And then the edge is overlocked. So cut it out, stitch your seam tape along the seam line, and then overlock the edge. Can you see how frilly that is though? If you don't if you don't use seam tape, if you just overlock, it's really, really likely that it's going to stretch. So you definitely need something, and I sometimes find that just stay stitching on its own isn't enough. I do know somebody who doesn't like some of the other methods, so I was going to suggest that when she cuts her garment out, she puts seam tape along the seam lines just so that they don't stretch. It's amazing what a difference that can make. Now another really nice finish, called a Hong Kong finish. The edges are bound, so you need to find something that coordinates nicely. And then they can either be left unstitched or you can stitch them flat. I like making my own bias tape. So I have lots of pieces of fabric, often fat quarters. They're really good. And I've put quite a few of them up against my handwoven fabric to see which one I like best. And it's either going to be one of these, this one or this one. I'm not sure about this one because it's got white in. And the fabric that I've woven doesn't have any white in. But when I looked at it, I actually thought it was rather nice. I'm going to show you how to make your own bias tape in another video. But basically you need one of these little gadgets and a piece of fabric cut on the bias. These are made by a company called Prim, Prym, and you can get them in different sizes. I think they look much nicer than just a plain colour, which can look a bit harsh. Obviously something like this is going to be on the inside, but if you're making perhaps an unlined jacket, it finishes the edges off really nicely and stops them from fraying. So that's another thing that you can do. If you look up Hong Kong finish, you might be able to find that in a book. The Dorling Kindersley sewing book's really good, I find. And last but not least, our favourite is to use strips of iron-on woven interfacing. Bit of a mouthful, but there we are. I buy this by the metre, and I get it medium weight. So I've got black, cream, white, and I'll use whichever one seems to go best with the fabric that I'm making. So the one I've got at the moment, I'm going to use black. So buy it by the metre. I use one called Stayflex. It's in the name. It's essentially muslin with glue on one side. So before you start cutting out, cut yourself a big pile of strips already. And then when you start cutting out, these are going to be ironed on to all the cut edges to seal them. You could use a press cloth if you're worried about your fabric, particularly if it's got any synthetics in it. And then once all your cut edges are sealed with this, that's when you can overlock or zigzag without any danger of them stretching. And obviously what you have to be careful of is when you look at it, you'll see that it's shinier on one side than the other. And it's actually worth having a spare iron for this. We've all done it and put it on the wrong side and it's stuck to your iron. But be careful, because once this is on your fabric, it's quite difficult to get off. So I've got a big pile of strips here. I've got a cutter and a cutting mat. So I do loads and loads, get them all ready before I start cutting out. That's going to be the next bit. So we're nearly there. This we've found is really the most reliable method. Once your cut edges have been sealed and then overlocked, you can stitch your garment without worrying at all. You can wash it and it'll last. It doesn't change. Please don't use the paper iron-on interfacing, because you'll find after a few years, because our hand-woven fabric generally has a bit of texture to it, that it just comes off. This stuff's wonderful because it's woven. It's got a bit of give to it. Now I don't cut it on the bias, even for going around armholes and necklines. I just cut straight. I'll show you how to get it round corners in a moment. So yes, I think in different countries it's called different things, but I get one called Stayflex. Decent fabric stores will have this, or I get it online from eBay. And this is the one that we find really most effective. Snip, snip, check twice, cut once. You've probably heard it before. Now at the moment I'm cutting out the right front. It's written on here. I'll want a right front, a left front, a right back, a left back, 2 sleeves. With my fabric, it doesn't have a right and a wrong side. So if the worst came to the worst and I cut out 2 right fronts, it wouldn't matter. I could just turn it round. But it's not really the best way to start. So I label everything as I go along. What a lovely noise. Nice sharp scissors. So that's one end cut off. Cut around the armholes. I've designed all of my patterns so that there's very little wastage. I move that down a little bit so you can see. Then around the neckline. So that's one piece cut out. That is my right front. Ta-da! That's it. Now what I'm going to do is pin a label on it. So I know I've done that one. And then I might pin it onto my dummy, but probably I'm going to do the interfacing on this next, just so that you can see. And then I'll pin it on the dummy and I can start to see what it's looking like. First piece done. Okay. Normally I use an ironing board, but I've got a cloth on my table here for the moment. Now this is what I mean by it making a lovely edge. This is a piece I did a while back. So it's really neat and tidy. There's no stretch to it. That's the right side. Wonderful stuff. So I cut strips that are wide enough to be held within the seam. The only time I change that is if I'm doing a binding around the neck, and sometimes the inside of the garment would show, so then I make it slightly narrower. So I've got my big pile of cut out strips. I've got my garment. Now I know this is the right front because it's got the label on it, so I know this is the right side. And I'm going to put the iron-on woven interfacing on the wrong side. So if I do the hem first, because that's just a straight strip, so a nice long piece. I've got a pair of scissors somewhere as well. Sounds like they're in there. Make sure I know which side is the shiny side. Yes, it's definitely that one. Keep your fingers out of the way. Now I don't need a press cloth with this because it's all wool. I don't use steam because there's always the danger that your iron-on woven interfacing might shrink. Some people even wash theirs first, then cut it. There we go, that's the first bit. So even now, already, that's much more secure. And then I'll overlock the edges. Now, to go around corners, rather than having sort of lumpy bits, I can either cut into the neckline side so that it overlaps very slightly, just a few small snips, that lies nice and flat. Or I can cut on the garment side, which opens it out very slightly. So again, just cut these little tiny notches all the way down, so that as it goes around the corner, it stretches very slightly. So again, you don't have lumpy bits. Couple more. I'll take a photograph of this in a minute until you can see it as a close-up. Either way is fine as far as I'm concerned. Then cut the spare off. And that piece will do for the shoulder. Just checking again. Because as I say, once this stuff is melted and glued on, oh dear, it's a horror to get off. I have had to do it before now. So what I had to do was warm it all up again with the iron and then very gently try and peel it off. It wasn't very easy though. So that is done. That's my right front. I'm going to overlock it next. It's wonderful. You can see it's still got a bit of give to it. There's no danger of that fraying or unravelling at all. So I don't know if you can see. That's where I cut the notches to go around the corner. But I will photograph that. So what I'm going to do is leave that folded neatly with the label showing for the moment. I'm going to cut out all the rest, do the same thing, seal all the raw edges, and then if I want to, I could just put it away at that point. Fold them up, put them away. Nothing's going to happen to them now. They're not going to fray. Rather than doing the interfacing for one piece and then overlocking it, and then interfacing and then overlock. So I think probably what I'll do is I'll interface all of the pieces. So that's 2 fronts, 2 backs, 2 sleeves. And then I'll use my overlocker. I have 2 overlockers. One's threaded with black, one's threaded with cream. So obviously I'll be using black for this one. It's just nice. Just so that it looks nice. Right. More cutting out. Okay, this is my overlocker threaded with black. I've got my right front here with the Stayflex on the wrong side. I normally have the Stayflex on the top. If you have a textured garment fabric, then possibly the presser foot might get caught in it. So, close to the edge as possible. I really don't want to lose anything. All it's doing is it's tidying up those little rough pieces. I go slightly beyond it and then I can turn it round easily. So slightly beyond the corner, around the armhole. When I turn it round, I have the needles out. Cut that little piece off, and then I can do the hem. So I'm going as close to the edge as possible. There we go. Lovely. Neat and tidy. All done. Neat on both sides. Oopsie. And then I'm going to pin it on the dummy. Right. All cut out. This is all that's left. So these bits up the end were from around the neckline and the armholes. And this piece that's left might use for pockets or possibly a bag. But as you can see, there's very little wastage. Now the sleeves I cut sideways, which sounds a bit mad, but it fits the pattern so much better, fits the fabric. So that's as shown on here. So the length of the sleeves is the width of the fabric, and that way there's hardly any waste. And they look absolutely fine. So it's all on the dummy now. That's the back view. I'm really pleased. I love it. Turn it around. You can see I've left all the labels on. This is the front view. Now it's all ready to stitch together. I've put the iron-on woven interfacing on all the cut edges, but I don't put it on the selvages. These are going to be a centre seam. I don't think it needs it. The only time I might put the interfacing on a seam is if I'm putting a zip in with a bit of seam tape just to strengthen it a bit. So that will all be hidden anyway. The edges of the sleeves are also the selvage, so I don't cut those off if I don't have to. Depending on how long the sleeve is, I might put a binding on the end, or I might turn them up, or if they look all right as they are, I'll probably just leave them. That's going to be once it's made and I put it on, and then I can decide. When I talk about we, it's my friend Elizabeth and I. We've known each other for nearly 40 years now. So these tips are things that we've both discovered on our journey. Now, the only other thing I was going to say was it's not much good cutting the notches from the pattern when you cut your garment out. So instead of that, I'll take a photograph. I've put the black Stayflex on, and I will then mark the notches on that. I think that's much more effective. So, ready to sew. The next video will be about sewing and tips about your sewing machine, following the pattern instructions. Today I am wearing DR009. It's a pinafore dress, which is one of my favourites. Thank you very much for watching. See you again soon. Bye now.